Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be kicking off the event. The University for Peace and the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Refugees of UNHCR gives you the warmest welcome. Today's event, Dialogues of Local Solutions for a Peaceful Coexistence, is a collective effort and a contribution to the General Resolution on Pacific Coexistence adopted by the General Assembly of UN on last March 5th, 2025, which recognizes that the promotion of a culture of peace, mutual understanding, and the respect for humanity's diversity, dialogue between civilizations, and the prevention of conflicts contributes to peaceful coexistence. This event has simultaneous translation from Spanish to English to whoever needs it. We urge you to please speak with a good pace and good cadence to assure the best translation possible. In the same manner, we thank the organizations to keep their interventions between 5 to 7 minutes in length. In order to kick off the event, we're going to hear the welcoming words of Dr. Francisco Rojas uh, from the University of Peace. Thank you very much, and good morning to the University for Peace of the United Nations, High Deputy High Commissioner of the United Nations, Ruben Nihateo, Mr. Ravi Abram, member of the Administration Council for the Global Center for Ecomet for Peaceful Coexistence, Andres Celis, our colleague and director of UNHCR in Costa Rica and Central American activities, Mr. Juan Carlos Saenzburgo, Vice Dean of the University for Peace. As it has been pointed out, this is a very important gathering in order to make progress such as we have done before in 2 or 3 previous meetings to collect good practices, review local experiences for a peaceful coexistence, and in order to achieve stability in the context of a global crisis and the great human mobilization that is taking place around the planet. In October of last year, when the General Secretary of the United Nations presented the University for Peace report, I pointed out that the promotion of peace becomes a fundamental objective in this new scenario of the international system, such as it is signaled by the Pact of the Future approved in September of 2024. In that occasion, I highlighted the global order based on rules, which is being replaced by the force of weaponry, war, and violence. War is out of control. Conflicts and war are the dominant tendency in the international system, the global system nowadays, and the United Nations are under attack. We should recognize that peace is weak, and this is having a direct impact on the mobility of individuals in different parts of the world because it opens spaces for their human rights to be violated and for the spaces that organized crime occupies with human trafficking. In the current international context, the construction of institutional frameworks for conflict resolution in a peaceful approach had a lesser spot in the international system. The instruments and institutions that are dedicated to violence and war are growing. Nowadays, we are currently in a transition process for the international system that does not hold any norms, particularly for the super powers in a changing world that is facing constant transformation. Today, threats and the inclination to the use of force are predominant, and this is affecting human mobility directly, besides the stability of the global system. We are facing a series of at least six different scenarios of increasing conflict. We do not have peace. We're not at peace with with our planet. The climatic emergency is growing day by day. Commercial wars are having a dire impact on global economies, and particularly on the most impoverished countries, which require the assistance of the international system. Traditional wars that are on course seem to be out of control and on the rise. And with these, the deaths and the violence, there's a perpetuation of spite, and it's transmitted throughout generations. And the atomic danger, the Armageddon, is strongly present, and also such as the climatic um, threat. Technological wars are on the rise, and with that, the use of artificial intelligence in the development of new types of weaponry. Artificial intelligence creates dire uncertainties on job security and its impact on our society. All that I previously said makes it so that the human mobility is increased, produced by wars, hunger, violence, insecurity, and lack of equality. The institutions for conflict prevention have been significantly less useful in these international contexts because these express severe weaknesses. The global and regional geopolitical tensions are on the rise, and with that, the polarization in countries is also on the rise, and omen a future of more conflict with wars and crises. And with these conditions, the opportunities to recover global and local stability are lessened, and there are more tensions between central stakeholders and also in areas with state weaknesses that are transformed uh, into a more presence of violence and presence of transnational organized crime. The derivations of what was previously mentioned on human rights, civil liberties, transparencies, pluralism, and cooperation are leading to great global and national regressions. There is a higher weight of transnational crime and a higher danger of new forms of crime that are more and more violent, linked to organized crime, particularly in the Americas. This has globally increased the use of violence, and it weakens the state's capacities to resolve this issue. What I previously mentioned means that we are inheriting the new generations today's issues without providing them with adequate solutions. The possibilities of a stable system that makes the best of the dividends of peace of the post-Cold War were not made concrete, and the multilateral system and the United Nations are under attack. War is on the rise, and it is necessary to recognize that peace is currently weak. We have a strong necessity of new diplomatic approaches, and I have argument that traditional methods for diplomacy are often not enough to face the contemporary challenges. The second lane, the diplomacy provides a space for innovation in international relationships, and the diplomatic processes for conflict resolution or to face shared challenges. These type of diplomatic practices are highlighted because of the importance of informal dialogues and parallel initiatives in order to improve relationships between stakeholders and onboard common problems in the bilateral, multilateral, and global contexts. These meetings, such as previous meetings that we have held, along with UNHCR in Geneva, in Africa, and those that we will develop for Asia and the Arab world, are expressed in this context of second track diplomacy. It is not official diplomacy, but an informal dialogue between stakeholders for a better understanding of the situation. The main objective is that through informal dialogue, new innovative initiatives arise that will give cohesion to a global and regional response to the regional challenges of human mobility, which seem to be out of control. And to that, we must add the necessity of visualizing the consequences and results of policies from different states. It is fundamental to review possible scenarios in order to define preventive policies. These second track diplomacy generates great benefits because it allows to act with flexibility and with the involvement of different stakeholders in building trust and with policy recommendations. This will allow us to focus in the promotion of peace as a central objective in the new international cycle, despite the great obstacles that we visualize. We need to recover peace and global stability and put the global public assets as a central element. Education is the fundamental principle for this change to instate peace and a culture for peace in a central position, seek and create spaces for dialogue and that will allow to reach basic agreements between the international stakeholders, and the role of the state is essential for the protection of the weakest. In this sense, I would like to congratulate the University for Peace, a global entity which has action in 4 different continents, 12 different cities in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas, in Europe, and that along with the Central Protection Entity for Human Beings, such as the UNHCR, we will develop this meeting today in Costa Rica. I am especially grateful to the Deputy High Commissioner for joining us in this space for reflection, and same to the members of the Global Center for the Command for Peaceful Coexistence, and the colleagues of IOM, UNHCR, and other colleagues with whom the university has worked day after day to place the dignity of individuals in placing central values such as tolerance, fraternity, and dignity in a central position. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dean. Now we are going to hear a message from Ms. Ruben Mimicdibella, Deputy High Commissioner for Protection of UNHCR.
live in a world where conflict, violence, and persecution, often exacerbated by climate factors, have forced over 123 million people to flee for their lives. Out of these, 38 million are refugees, meaning they have left their countries of origin to seek asylum elsewhere. 72 million are people displaced within their own countries. 49 million are children. Some 300 million others require international humanitarian assistance, even if they have not been forced to flee their homes. 60 million forcibly displaced women and girls are facing severe risks of gender-based violence today. The principal reason for these staggering figures is, of course, the failure to bring conflicts to an end or to bring about lasting peace. Last year alone, UNHCR managed 43 emergencies across 25 countries. Since the beginning of this year, we are already managing 17 emergencies. As you can see, new crises emerge before all ones are resolved, stretching resources and capacities to the limit. As violence and conflict continue to drive record levels of displacement, resources that usually went to resolve conflicts or to help those whose lives have been ravaged by them are shrinking. Today, the humanitarian sector is grappling with severe challenges and an uncertain future, as top donors have dramatically reduced their funding. For UNHCR and our partners, the announcements by a quarter of our top donors to reduce their overseas aid has already resulted in significant and devastating impacts for millions of people displaced by war and persecution. For example, in South Sudan, services for women and girls who have experienced or survived gender-based violence are being reduced or shut down altogether, with up to 80,000 women being left without access to services. This is why ongoing efforts like the series of dialogues here to address underlying causes and strengthen institutions with and alongside the affected communities are absolutely critical. We urgently need to strengthen the collaboration between humanitarian, development, peace, and security actors to find sustainable solutions. Peace is the most durable of solutions. The Global Compact on Refugees recognizes that advancing and sustaining peace is a prerequisite to addressing global forced displacement. It is also the precursor to the return of refugees to their countries of origin in safety and dignity. Peace building is inherently a collaborative approach. It requires humanitarian development and political action at the local, national, and international levels to effectively create lasting peace. Local actors, including organizations led by refugees, youth, women, persons with disabilities, cities, parliaments, academics, faith-based actors, and the private sector are key contributors to solutions. The multi-stakeholder pledges by 32 entities, including 19 member states, on inclusive peace building, conflict prevention, and the HDP Nexus, announced at the Global Refugee Forum in December 2023, are an important commitment in this respect. For example, Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Cameroon made commitments during that forum to support conditions in their countries for the return in safety and dignity of their nationals. Ladies and gentlemen, time and time again, we also see that forcibly displaced people are largely missing from fora where decisions are made about their lives, despite having so much to contribute as agents in peace-building processes. As we deal with a multitude of crises, we must strengthen the engagement of affected people in these processes. They are uniquely placed for more effective and reliable interventions. They have significant expertise, a keen understanding of the challenges and solutions stemming from their own lived experiences, and invaluable access to specific communities and networks of influence. For example, in Honduras, displaced youth are strengthening civil society organizations to enhance civic engagement and prevent violent gang recruitment. Here in Costa Rica, young Nicaraguan refugees are using creative tools to promote human rights and peaceful coexistence. They have founded an artistic community that now brings together Costa Rican and refugee artists from 5 nationalities who recently launched a 12-song record to raise awareness about their experiences in forced displacement. and to promote cultural dialogue and empathy. These are the seedlings of how peace begins. I look forward to hearing more from you today, our colleagues working at the grassroots level, including from refugee and women led organizations, about some of your interventions and effective practices. UNHCR remains committed to supporting peace building and conflict prevention efforts as part of our mandate to ensure protection and solutions for those who are forcibly displaced, and by strengthening dialogues like this one today. And an unprecedented event has occurred. I appear to have lost my place in the speech. Oh, here we are. Local Solutions Towards Peaceful Coexistence is the basis of our dialogue series with the University for Peace. This is the third of 5 dialogues we aim to hold in each of the regions where UNHCR works. These aim to foster knowledge and draw the linkages between forced displacement, protection, and peace. We hope these dialogues will also increase the inclusion of forcibly displaced people, refugee-led organizations, and returnees into peace-building efforts. This is a challenge to which we must rise. We held the first of these dialogues in Geneva last year, bringing together actors to discuss the inclusion of refugees in their peace-building initiatives in Europe. The second was held earlier this year in Nouakchott, Mauritania, as part of the 4th conference to promote peace in Africa, where we heard how a common agenda for peace is needed across the continent. It is vital that we document some of these positive efforts to include forced displacement in peace building. We hope to release such a publication at the high-level officials meeting to be convened in December this year, and I hope that you will all contribute to the publication in the coming months. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reiterate the importance of putting forward our pragmatic responses, prevention strategies, and concrete examples of effective local solutions to further inspire collective action in different contexts. I wish you a very successful dialogue. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, alta comisionada. El Centro Global King Hamad para la Convivencia
For
Pacífica
peaceful coexistence was established in 2018 through a royal decree emitted by the Rey Hamad bin, King Hamad bin Isa Khalifa of Bahrain. The center has the objective of promoting values such as peace, harmony, and respect between individuals and societies. We give the warmest welcome to Rabbi Arbahan Skorka, member of the Administrative Council for the King Hamad Global Council for Peaceful Coexistence.
Good morning for everybody. I was asked, first and foremost, my dear rector, dear assistant high commissioner, dear companions in this panel, I was asked to talk in English for some reasons, but I had a very short conversation. I exchanged very few words with the rector of this institution, and he assured me that the great majority of you are from Latin America, and that your mother tongue is Spanish. So I was born also in Latin America. Maybe that you don't recognize in my English my Argentinian roots, but in order to honor my Argentinian roots, my South American roots, my Latin American roots, please permit me to continue in Spanish. Para mí es un gran honor representar y un privilegio, como se suele decir generalmente en inglés, a privilege, representar al King Hamad Global Center for Coexistence and Tolerance, que apoya a todos aquellos proyectos en alrededor del mundo que promueven la paz,
which promote peace and coexistence. I want to mention to all of you the achievement of the efforts, the achievements of these institutions' efforts, led, of course, and inspired by King Hamad of Bahrain, who, in an encounter we had with him, he explained from his spiritual legacy's perspective, promoting peace has to be one of the most important purposes during his administration. And during on March 5th of this year, and thanks to the efforts of the different members of the center, of which I am a part of, and I am very proud of being a part of, the General Assembly for the United Nations approved with a great majority a declaration in which it is established that on January the 28th, it will be consecrated as the International Day for Peace. And one of the project's items in this declaration, it is stated that it is decided to declare January the 28th the International Day for Peaceful Coexistence, and this will be celebrated every year. As you are very much aware, I am a rabbi, which means being a master within a teacher within the Jewish community. And when I saw that these project was approved, that this resolution had been approved, it really made contact with my most inner fibers, because on January the 27th, the International Day for the Memory of the Holocaust is celebrated, meaning the assassination of 6 million Jews in Europe during World War II, which in Hebrew is known as Shoah, which means devastation. And the word Holocaust, which means sacrifice, where an animal is completely burned. It is true. The bodies of 6 million Jews, amongst which my ancestors were found both from my mother's and father's side, their end was met in the crematory ovens of Auschwitz and Treblinka. And these 2 days, merely fate-based, January the 27th was designated based on the proposal of Israel in the General Assembly and approved by a great majority, of course, because it is the day in which Auschwitz, this death camp, was liberated. And God, and for God and faith to place these two celebrations next to each other really it says a lot. This document holds some very special paragraphs that I would like to comment on. In one of them, it is stated that recognizing that peace is not only the absence of conflict, but this was part of the considerations to declare January the 28th as the International Day for Peaceful Coexistence and other purposes. So between the considerations, it is stated that recognizing that the peace is not only the absence of conflicts, but also requires a positive, dynamic, and participative process in which dialogue is promoted and conflicts are resolved with the spirit of understanding and mutual cooperation. I think this paragraph is truly essential. This document could easily be left off as just dead letters. Many of the treaties and resolutions and whatnot For the future, they can just be left as dead letters. Let's remember that in 1920, after the tremendous disaster that World War One represented for civilization, that was when the League of Nations was created. In 1946, we had to recreate a new institution that resembled this league, which is now the United Nations, because all of the efforts of the League of Nations failed. It was positively known since 1920 to 1939 that a second big conflagration was going to take place. It was known, and some, let's speak with property, some attempted to do the very best to try to avoid that conflict, that war. But it's not only about treaties, or not only through treaties, that peace can be achieved. The main actor for peace is the individual. Whilst we don't have societies in which we truly have individuals that are ingrained with great human values and principles, not merely scientific values that are specialized in one subject or the other, but that are truly ingrained and committed with human values. And this is what I would like to highlight at this moment. We won't have mechanisms that will achieve the installation of a reality of peace on earth. In 1932, the League of Nations told Albert Einstein, pick a colleague for dialogue and pick whatever topic you want as a contribution for the League of Nations. And Albert Einstein gave out an enormous message to the League of Nations and the world, and he selected Sigmund Freud as his colleague for dialogue, and the topic that was analyzed was in German. The book is called Weltkrieg, Why Warfare, and it is an epistolar exchange where they both, desperately knowing what was coming, attempted to understand what can be done at an individual level, and therefore at a social level, to try to avoid conflict. Once more, I repeat myself, peace is something that we are going to achieve on our human reality when we have men and women who truly pursue peace, and men and women who will truly have the willingness to build said peace. As you know, I had a friend. Unfortunately, I was very close with Pope Francis. We were very close to each other, and he used to have an expression that I really liked. Peace is something that we have to build. And the reason I enjoyed this phrase so much was because he's using a very Jewish expression. All of our main prayers are finalized by saying, the one who builds peace in the heights should bring peace to us. And this is part of the second verse of the 25th chapter of the Eov or Hob book, Job in English. So we have to start with the individual. We have to start with education, and as the rector himself mentioned, the tool that we have, besides education, which is basic, is dialogue. I put this in practice 15 years ago. In 2010, I published a book of dialogue with Pope Francis. He was a cardinal of Buenos Aires at the time, and we tried to show all the Argentinian society through a TV show that we recorded that dialogue is the road, but not just as merely words that we were exchanging with each other, as Pope Francis used to say, dialogue where the one person is sincerely placed in another person's shoes and does their best to understand them. May God bless your work and ours. And in order to finalize, I would like to share with all of you the biblical idea around peace. Peace in Hebrew is shalom or salam in Arab. Shalom has the same root in Hebrew as shalem, which means the whole. On the Bible, in the book of Numbers, God tells Moses to instruct the priests in how the Israeli people have to be blessed, and many Christians and Catholics here present must have these present because it is very often in Christian literature it is said, "May God bless you," and may God turns His face towards you in finalizing the blessing, and may God bless us with peace. The most we can aspire to reach to live in a more sane world is having a reality that is a little more with, without the presence of so much violence, with a little bit more presence of love, of tenderness, which in last instance are synonyms of peace. May God give us the opportunity and the intelligence to take action, starting here or continuing in during this meeting, and also remembering that despite great institutions, a single individual can represent change, and that single person can be any one of us here present. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. We are now going to hear Dr. Juan Carlos Sainz Borgo, Vice Rector of the University for Peace, who is going to present about the link between solutions to forced displacement, humanitarian efforts, and the efforts building peaceful coexistence. Welcome, Vice Rector. Good morning, everyone. May all of you be welcomed to the University for Peace. Assisting High Commissioner, Mr. Rector, Rabbi, Mr. Andres, colleagues, and friends. As it was well pointed out by our Rector and the Assisting High Commissioner, and Mr. Rabbi, this has been a series of encounters that the High Commissioner's Office for Refugees at the University for Peace has been working on. And I was asked to do one of the most difficult tasks, which is providing a context between the link and solutions to displaced and humanitarian efforts in the consolidation of peace. And yesterday, while I was discussing with the organizers, mentioning that they were so evil that they didn't put any time frame for me within the program, so it was such a difficult task. I was short, and I was wondering, oh, I already did my dissertation in a different topic, because this is definitely a topic for a dissertation. So discuss the writing, conversing, and perhaps I decided to take a specific avenue on this topic, and it's the reason why we're all meeting here, and it is that without a doubt, the movement of individuals is consubstantial with civilization, with what we know since immemorial times, since the world has existed. of individual auction books records mobilizations have meant, such as the fleeing of Egypt, forced displaced mobilizations, and all of these are very much articulated to the idea of individuals being mobilized. But the mobilization of individuals in different manners in different times of history. In certain occasions, it had this has have been perceived as a trend, in others as business and opportunities, and even a table for salvation. Nowadays, the perceptions on the mobilization of individuals have drastically changed since the creation of UNHCR in the decade of the 40s. To this date, what was perceived as an opportunity is now perceived as a danger. According to the most recent study of the Ipsos pollster regarding what concerns the current world, the first main causes of concern are crime and violence, secondly and thirdly, poverty and inequality, and fourth, unemployment. These terms, according to this same pollster Ipsos, are added to the global debate, which considers that 60% of the global population considers that the governments of the world are not directing their actions on the right avenues. These movements and these four main issues that we described are looking for responsible parties. Some look for them in their governments, as I mentioned, with this number of 60%, but many consider that it is the other. The foreigner, the migrant, is responsible for the problems that affect their country or their society. For example, a CIES study in Spain during September of 2024, 30.4% of Spanish citizens consider immigration as their greatest concern. Ipsos in Germany pointed out that last year 44% of Germans are concerned about the lack of control for immigration, and um, pose the movement of individuals as responsible for the increase of immigration and lack of public security. Gallup mentioned in the United States during February of 2024 that 55% of U.S. citizens consider immigration as a critical threat. In our region, for example, in Colombia, 80% of individuals believes that immigration negatively affects security in their country. In Chile, 60% considers that irregular immigration is the main cause of crime. This, according to a BID study, poses an increase of an 11% in the region in negative perceptions towards immigration in the region. Also, in studies based on opinions in a phenomenon such as the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union, known also as Brexit, the perception of the migrant, of the foreigner, was considered as responsible for the delay in the economic growth in the United Kingdom, and is responsible for their departure of the UN, of the EU. These perceptions are recorded by public opinion studies, remind me to the preamble of the UNESCO Declaration, and it states it is in the mind of men where the conflict starts. Therefore, it is in the mind of men where defenses for peace have to be built on, which is why an institution such as the University for Peace, which is supposed to teach and change the minds of individuals through a mandate from the United Nations, is under the mandate of building human capital for peace, has been working with the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Refugees in order to find ample solutions that are comprehensive and long lasting for forced displacement, which are in the mind and capacities of the people in order to reproduce them in reality later. In these collective work context between UNHCR and the University for Peace, both institutions of the UN system, we have been able to articulate our mandates, which has allowed us to perform humanitarian actions in with the support of UNHCR, and has allowed us to prepare dozens of professionals with solid technical and theoretical knowledge, but with a practical experience when working with populations that are in search of protection with the highest working standards, such as those established by UNHCR. This work is not limited to the campus in which we find ourselves in here in Costa Rica, but also in our role in supporting governments throughout the continent with the process of Quito initiative, where the University for Peace is part of the coordination of academic networks, along with other two universities and representatives from UNHCR and the IOM. Having said this, may all of you be welcome to a space for dialogue in order to understand the best way to perceive and understand these phenomena and consolidating peace in the mind and actions of individuals. Thank you, Vice Rectors. We're going to start with our dialogue. This event has two segments of 30 minutes each, where we are going to have interventions. The first being centered around best practices for the creation of peaceful coexistence, and the second being some reflections, challenges, and opportunities that we have towards the future. These first segment begins now, and the interventions are going to take place from each table. There is a microphone in each table, so I would really appreciate it if you can move it around to whoever is going to speak. In this first segment, we're going to welcome Mr. Dennis Castillo, Executive Director of IRCA Casa Abierta, for his intervention. Okay, am I audible? Perfect. Thank you, High Commissioner of the United Nations for Refugees, and thank you, University for Peace, for inviting our organization, IRCA Casa Abierta, is an institution on immigration and refugee for LGBTQ community in Central America. My name is Dennis Castillo Fuentes. I am the Executive Director, and I would like to share, in order to kick off this dialogue, that in Central America, being a member of the LGBTQ community still means to be condemned to live under persecution and the hate crimes that we face. It is not strange to anyone that we are living an increase in the presence of hate speeches and violence against our community. In these contexts, this hostility persists against the population with extortions, assaults that come from the society, family, which causes forced displacement and for hate crimes to go unpunished. 2 years ago, precisely, along with four organizations of five different countries, we created a report where we visibilized the violence that LGBTQ community members face due to prejudice. More than 1,000 cases that were documented, and it's such a regrettable situation that we understand the vulnerability that this population faces, and this also calls us to find solutions. And we understand that Costa Rica, as a country which is committed to human rights, however, the challenge is to guarantee true, real protection that goes well beyond the status of refugee. From IRCA, Casa Abierta, we have some good practices that I am going to mention, and it has been interesting since we are an organization that is born from civil society, from the different experiences that different refugees and displaced individuals who came to the country have lived. And it is very important to mention that Costa Rica, at a regional level, is leading the topic in progressing LGBTQ legislation and progress. We know that there are challenges but there is openness for dialogue in order to find solutions for these situations. We count with an integrative attention system, psychological, and accompaniment with a perspective of diversity, gender, and human rights, which has allowed us to provide this approach to the population so that they can heal from their displacement when facing the situation through affirmative therapies, safe spaces, which through inclusive protocols, we have been able to provide constant workshops. We have a public private partnership with companies and state institutions, which allows us to provide these type of trainings in order to provide sensitivity and making the situation of LGBTQ community members more visible. We have an employment office. This is a convention with the Ministry of Work that we are the only LGBTQ organization that is within the National Employment Strategy (ANE), which has allowed us to open profiles in the platform to individuals. We also have a physical space in our organization in order to access employment mediums for living and for them to integrate and contribute to the country's development. This has also been a challenge. We understand there is a situation of low education in the majority of the population, and through cooperation, we have been able to create a local computer lab which helps us provide training to the population so that they know how to handle these tools. We have a very successful program called Impulsate Ya, and these includes more than 1,300 individuals that we're accompanying, and 65% have been able to integrate the employment market through business ideas or through a position in one of the companies with whom we have partnerships. This has allowed us to empower the population in order to create support networks, leadership, and preparation in citizenship. They have also received legal accompaniment for their migrational processes, which is fundamental for us because this also allows them to have real and dignified integration in the country. This autonomy allows them to insert themselves in the labor market through workshops. We have a convention with the National Institution for Learning, with the Omar Dengo Foundation, which has allowed us for these capacities to be truly installed in the individuals. True protection demands core responsibility, and we understand that articulating between the state, civil society, academics, and the international community is important. And it is precisely through these dialogue for peace that it requires to be peaceful and free of violence towards the population. And lastly, I would like to mention that today, more than ever, the LGBTQ community that is here as refugees needs justice, needs recognition, and a place where they can live in pride of who they are. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for this first segment. We're going to have three interventions, and then there's going to be an open dialogue. You will raise your hands, you will say your name and the organization that you represent. So we're going to continue, and when dialogue is open, we're going to take on more spontaneous interventions from the table. Coming up, we would like to have Mr. Lilio Campo of the Prilaca ONG, who's going to, he's a Nicaraguan and of Mosquito origins. So we're going to now listen to Mr. Ocampo. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be able to share a little bit of the experiences from my organization and also the perspective of the Mosquito people that I belong to. It's first of all, it's important to note that the Nicaraguan state speaks a lot about peaceful coexistence, but this coexistence is without justice, without memory, without rights, and it's a coexistence without an adequate integration of indigenous populations. This is not the peaceful coexistence that we aspire to as indigenous communities in Sri Lanka. We have bet from the very beginning to a peaceful mobility and from for all of our work to start from the perspective of human rights because we believe that this is the foundation for a peaceful coexistence in order to build long lasting peace, dialogue, and horizontal organization and the strengthening of leadership in women and youth, and finding key partners have been fundamental in this work. New leaderships require the development of soft skills for a better performance, not only the political exercise of the spaces that they represent. We also come from the fact that there has been a history of discrimination and violence that has gone unpunished, and that we have had to move around. Modern societies in Latin America are built upon this heritage of colonialism and injustice, which destroyed and ended so many indigenous communities. We also understand that our proposals, such as the right to access land, right to preserve our native tongue, and the right to live according to our cosmovision and other demands, also question the status quo of the dominant society. And we also recognize that our political power as indigenous communities has been weak, and that our organizational capacity has been deteriorated throughout the last few years. How can we innovate in a new organization, in a new political culture, are questions that are constantly motivating us. In that sense, Prilaca has been one of the organizations that has promoted the creation of the Observatory for Indigenous and African Descending individuals, which monitors attacks against human rights lived in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and another based called Inana, which seeks international incidency around our demands. We bet in that sense to a new form of organization. In exile, the first biggest challenge that we have faced has been adapting to a different society, adapting to a different country, despite being neighbors. This is a very different country to ours, and understanding it and integrating into it has not been simple. First of all, because we await to be able to return to our countries, and because the indigenous and African descending population comes with social and economic backgrounds that make it difficult to integrate the societies. Just as an example, a diagnosis was done in Prila last year of the indigenous and African descending population, and 96% of them has not been able to finish a technical or university degree. So this can give you an idea what it means in terms of integration to the liberal market, or in order to be able to support their necessities while living here. In that sense, operating with our organizations in Costa Rica pose its own challenges. It's a culture with more bureaucracy that we are learning to understand, and we hope to do things right from our end. In exile, Prilaca, along with other forms of leadership, has promoted the space for indigenous spaces, one called Kiamkamde. We have several young women here who are part of the space, and we are working in strengthening the organization for the different indigenous individuals who are distributed throughout all the different cantons in Costa Rica, not only in San Jose, like in La Carpio, Pavas, La Abuelita, but in other areas of the country, and who also require accompaniment in order to integrate, be able to integrate this country. We have also worked on the creation of a project that is called Contribution to Dignifying Integration in Exile. And the first thing has been identifying key stakeholders, such as the Refugee Unit for the General Direction of Immigration and Foreigners, and also the High Commissioner's Office for Refugees in UNHCR, amongst other organizations from Nicaragua, such as Asideo, Nicaragua Nunca Más, amongst others. There are necessities for an adequate accompaniment of the indigenous and African descending community, also facilitating culturally appropriate information. And in this sense, it is a collective work from the organizations. We need to be able to integrate a perspective that truly understands the realities and cosmovision of indigenous communities. And from our end, we need to understand how organizations function here. In that sense, the use of our language and understanding the root causes as to why the indigenous and African descending communities are here, which are here due to this forced displacement. We are still lacking in the current context. We still have many challenges. We have There's a big problematic that is affecting many families, such as the difficult conditions which don't allow them to have enough income to have a dignified life, or being able to understand because there are many Mosquito individuals who do not properly speak Spanish, so many things are not properly comprehended by them. So there is important work to be developed here. Or we also, as indigenous community, we have the reproduction of our culture in exile, and in that sense, the reproduction of our memories is very important. The International Day for Indigenous Communities, August 9th, or the Day for Autonomy in Nicaragua, which is on October 30th, when the autonomy law was approved in 1987, or the commemoration of important dates in which armed farmers have attacked communities in the past, such as August in 2023, where the biggest massacre of indigenous, more than 17 indigenous individuals were murdered. These are days in which we analyze how we're doing as communities and the challenges we face. Also, the reproduction of our language. We have worked along with other organizations in the development of mosquito lessons for children because we understand that there is a prior exile from the 80s, and there are individuals whose children don't speak mosquito and they're losing their culture, and we do not want this to happen again. And also, I would like to finalize by stating that the indigenous and African descending population works according to their tradition from the horizontally. This requires to be approved and recognized by the state, the international community, civil society, the private sector, in order to strengthen a dignified insertion in the country. Hopefully, in 2100 indigenous communities are still here, and this has to be a collective, but our cosmovision and cultural values have a lot to contribute to the great challenges of our time, but this is not going to be possible if we don't recognize the subjects that can allow in the different spaces for decision making. Hopefully the second track diplomacy that Mr. Francisco Rojas made mention to opens paths not only to walk together but to be able to build peace. Thank you, Dimi. Now we're gonna hear Mr. Jose Martinez, President of Asideo. Thank you and good morning to everyone. Welcome to this space. I'm truly grateful to the University of Peace and UNHCR for inviting me, and I would like to start by understanding that we are talking about good practices. As an association, we have developed this necessity for good practices from our very name, Intercultural Association for Human Rights. We sustain that the intercultural approach is the perfect tool and an excellent path for peaceful coexistence between populations because the interculturality as a term speaks about the development of cultural diversity, and culture is not only about arts and folklore. Culture means coexistence in different forms of existence. Is the idiosyncrasy, is the difference at the same time is the way in which those differences link us together. I would like to speak about some examples developed from Asideo and with the accompaniment of our association. And I'm going to kick off with some topics. The displaced population has been victim of the processes of loss of culture. Many of them have children who were born here and who don't know about their parents' culture. At the same time, Costa Rica is a country that nourishes itself from cultural diversity, but unfortunately lacks these spaces for the migrant to participate in and the union of nationals in cultural spaces in a landscape where the context doesn't have enough spaces to recreate themselves. And for culture to be shared, it is important to highlight that we need to understand that fostering population can be national resident population or even a refugee population that has already been resettled into a space, but that allows also to foster other individuals. There is a necessity for developing common spaces for cultural recreation and for peaceful coexistence. From the migrant artist context, we an initiative to create this space was born the COPAL, the cooperative for artists and audiovisual producers in Latin America, which congregates and is still open to enrollment for artists of the 6 different nationalities, including Costa Ricans, and with an interdisciplinary participation, which means that we not only have singers, we have poets, writers, artists from different disciplines, puppet masters, narrators, storytellers. Culture is truly ample, for which I invite us to understand this concept of culture and interculturality as something more. Copan has even had participation in international spaces in Colombia, for example, and has inspired those territories, such as Colombia, to create similar spaces, initiatives such as Copal, initiatives in which artists are prepared, strengthened, support networks are developed for them in order to receive these displaced migrant community. I personally, I am an artist, and at that time I did not have that space where I could recreate myself as an artist, and Copal gave me tools. It has audiovisual equipment, which allows us to understand in a sort of co-op between migrants and nationals, between the fostering community and migrants. This space allows not only to develop such support network, but also that space in which we collaborate to work together, even with concerts, in the development of products, such as the product that the deputy I commissioner was mentioning. Monarca is an album developed by displaced men and women who wanted to tell their story and create a memory through songs, and in which 35 different artists from 6 nationalities participated in. This album was created to narrate the story of their displacement, and at the same time, they had the opportunity of coexisting, talking and understanding why artists are displaced, why we have set necessities, and also to launch a message to the world. We do not migrate out of our own will, but because we were forced to. I would also like to highlight some initiatives that we have presented from Asideo, such as the Asideo House. Our offices were the cultural center for culture and memory, recreational center for education, and a space in which artists from different countries would meet up in order to teach lessons, to speak about poetry, to have puppet shows, and for stories to be narrated throughout those shows to explain why the migrant needs to be able to work in this country in order to survive, but with dignification. And we had children, elderly citizens attending, and we even thought some of them were too conservative and were not going to listen. And after departing from these spaces, their narrative began to change. They started meeting with nationals and migrants who had a different perspective, and we started nurturing these new speech for the necessity of coexistence. Just as that, we celebrated with UNHCR a project for coexistence in our psychological network. And what we did was making the best of these links that bring us together, such as religion, the church. We went to a Christian church, and we proposed to the fostering community the whole psycho emotional workshops, and we included the indigenous migrant community, including mosquitoes, with tools to provide a psychological first response and providing mutual assistance to weave these network, this support network that is required for fostering. Our message from all the spaces that we dispose of is that we need to be able to grow together without extinction of our origin and in sought of coexistence. We are human beings. That is the main message that we give. The barrier of a country's identity or of origin is imposed by the mind. And as beings, we can bypass that barrier and grow together. These are some of the practices that we have celebrated from Asileo. Thank you. Thank you. Just well, in order to wrap up with this first segment, we would like to hear Alejandra Moreira from Accenture to hear the perspective of the private sector, and then we're going to have an open dialogue space. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here representing the private sector. Definitely, for a peaceful coexistence, we need to be able to speak about dignifying work and sources of employment. For these, we need to work in a coordinated fashion with the private sector. In the case of Accenture, maybe not many of you know this, we're a multinational company with presence in more than 52 countries. In Costa Rica, we are part of the top 15 employers in the country. We work with different organizations specifically based on our social responsibility strategy, which states that we need to generate abilities to include the populations that most required into technological capacities. Part of our multinational axle includes innovation. And in innovation, there is much research that points out that for innovation to be possible, we need of the best type of talent independently from its origins. It is because of this we have been working with our social responsibility strategy with the Omar Dengo Foundation, Hayas, or the Mujer Foundation, in having a platform to train in soft skills, technical skills, and digital skills. We have trained population throughout the whole country, north and south of the country, and this is the platform that offers more than 200 courses that are related to research that we as a multinational company have helped with organizations such as the World Economic Forum, understanding what are the abilities that are going to be necessary for the next 5 years, abilities that are required and necessary in by the private sector. We focus in artificial intelligence, digital marketing, technical and digital skills, for which I invite you all to find a partner and ally in Accenture. There are free tools already available, and I invite those organizations that do preparational processes to not do these without the inclusion of the private sector. Preparational process that doesn't lead to dignifying work probably lacks some research about the necessities. The private sector is interested in the refugee population. Accenture is interested in the refugee population, and they need to work in an articulated manner. Undalva is one of our best practices. We have trained more than 300 individuals throughout the last few years with these three different foundations with our key partners. We have been able to hire refugees, and we continue to be interested in hiring refugees. But additionally, we train children, youth, and adults in these abilities that are sought for by the private sector. I am at your service. I am truly joyful of being part of this space and joyful in representing an organization that is really truly committed with the refugees agenda. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Alejandra. We're going to have open and space for open dialogue. We appreciate if your interventions can be of a maximum of 5 minutes in length. Ana Quiroz from CISOS is going to speak first. Thank you and good morning. I first of all would like to say something that perhaps might seem obvious, but it's that migrants comes in all different shapes, sizes. These are men, women, LGBTQ community members, and everything. And if we don't start from these recognition, we are truly, truly in trouble. Secondly, I would like to propose recognition to a practice that I have found very positive in UNHCR and other academic institutions in order to deepen and inform regarding the contribution that the migrant population does to the economy and lives of countries. Here in Costa Rica, UNHCR, along with the University of Costa Rica, and alongside other institutions, have held several presentations regarding the contributions to the GDP from the Nicaraguan migrant population in particular, which is the majority, with an 80 something percent of presence. And taking off from these recognition would allow countries and societies to accept, incorporate, and provide more integrative spaces to the migrant population, and not seeing them as a burden, as a hindrance, or as something that you have to get rid of. But so to recognize the that DR has made out to an point of view to try to find partners and try to find mission of the contributions that populations give to every country. Otherwise, we're going to continue turning our backs towards them and deepening discrimination, racism, and ignorance around what migrants contribute with to our countries. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Anna. Mr. Roberto Mera from Mayas has requested the microphone now. Good morning, Roberto, and I have Dennis, my other colleague from Hayes, here present. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am going to be very brief with some of the aspects that have already been mentioned. Very importantly, from the experience that we have from Hayes here in Costa Rica, I believe that, in fact, the recent experience that we have had working with Costa Rican communities, but most of all, with what we have spoken about, the construction of peace, development of communities, is something that is very much bound with the reconstruction of the sense of dignity in the individual. We have to first work from the foundation of this construction with the dignity of the person at its center. The refugees and communities mentioned that when mobilizing to a new country, this dignity is lost, and this dignity is something that should never be lost in transit or when arriving to a new country. And this happens everywhere where there is a diminishment in their dignity, or that their dignity might have been left behind in the countries that they left behind. This is something very personal and that is worked in a very personal and individual fashion with each refugee that we work with, and it requires this psychological and psychosocial component in the construction of communities. Haya's role in communities has recently been very valuable and reminds us of the importance of working with schools. For example, the majority of refugee women and children have mentioned to us that schools are like a second home, and they describe it as a place in which they find protection within their communities. Also, municipalities, and this is something that there's a saying that says that you see the value when you're present, and something that we have seen since January. But after being affected by this whole financing crisis, municipalities have knocked on our doors asking where we are, and we have had to tell them where we currently are, how we are reformulating our agendas in order to reach them. But the most valuable thing here is that municipalities are knocking on doors, are looking for us, saying that they have refugee entrepreneurs and how they are assisting them in these projects that perhaps Hyatt's and other organizations help them begin with. And there has been this gradual change of responsibility towards municipalities who are allies and friends to the refugees causes. This is something extremely positive to highlight. Also, the alliances with the private sector, such as our colleague from the sector was mentioning, one of the initiatives that take place in Costa Rica and that I find very important to continue are the Vivir la Integración Award, Vivir la Integración Award, Vivir la Inclusión Award, which is one of the times of the year in which not only organizations feel joyful in the progress that we achieve with refugees, but also making us all key stakeholders in the response given to refugees, not only through organizations, but also the private sector and others. And in order to wrap up with other initiatives, and something that we have also found valuable in Hayas in terms of integration has been the translation of the different forms for the refugee unit into the mosquito language. This is something the mosquito population has come to our offices and has said the refugee unit has forms in mosquito, and this reaffirms the receptivity of the state in contributing that individuals, in this case mosquito, can feel these linkage to the integration from day one when they step into the refugee unit. Thank you very much, Mr. Roberto. We now have the Colectivo Nunca Más Collective. Hello, Jair Valdivia from the Nicaragua Nunca Más Collective. I would like to focus on peaceful coexistence. And perhaps I am going to echo Anna's words with some obvious things that are important to bring to the table regardless, and it is that Nicaraguans are living under a dictatorship. We are not migrating only because of economic reasons, but because there is a dictatorship in one of the strongest dictatorships that have been in place for many years. And we Nicaraguans are very much aware of this. In the case of the international community, according to many reports that different mechanisms of the United Nations have issued and human rights organizations have presented, there is awareness of this, and I believe that in this space there is a general consensus on this topic. But when it is not clear for governments that there is a root cause for which you have X amount of Nicaraguans present in your territory, this peaceful coexistence no longer is present. And for this, we require of the voices of the people to whom the government do listen to, which is the international community. And I would like to echo here and request to each of you that these voices are amplified because the situation in Costa Rica for Nicaraguans is not simple, and I'm going to mention three points in particular. The first, those who are unable to return to Nicaragua. These records, it is my understanding that are very much of immigration and foreign activity office, because when individuals go to the Nicaraguan border in order to attempt to re-enter the country, they are immediately denied entry. This record remains, I suppose, in the immigration office through any of their offices at the borders, and this becomes of immediate awareness to the state. The state is aware and holds these statistics, and given the amount of testimonies that have been given by those who are applying for refuge here in Costa Rica, there is a reality. If there are two individuals telling you that just because of waving the national flag they have been displaced to Costa Rica, one could think that these are just isolated cases. But when there is a systematization, when there is an ample number of individuals simply because the fact that they waved the national flag have been displaced to Costa Rica. Here we have a pattern that you really have to start putting your mind into. So there is awareness from the authorities, and the other point is security. The attempts that have taken place against Nicaraguans here and the judicial investigation organization has done their work, has led these investigations, and so the authorities are aware of the situation as well. Therefore, we are not able to speak about peaceful coexistence if the country, fostering country, does not recognize the problem that the population that they are receiving is facing. So, in order to wrap up with my intervention, I would like to point out that these civil society organizations of Nicaragua here present, this is something that we are very much aware of. But if this information comes from the international community, this is going to amplify our work to continue doing incidency. Okay, in order to conclude with this first section of dialogue, then we're going to have a coffee break. One more intervention of 5 minute stops. And then we are going to invite you all to enjoy a cup of coffee. I am going to be very brief. If you could just say your name and the organization. My name is Carla for the International Defense of Children in the Costa Rican section. I am the coordinator of protection to minors for refugees, asylum seekers, and applicants. And after hearing everyone, I wanted to be respectful in what I'm saying, but the context of funding reduction was has mentioned many cuts in organizations that work with the migrant community, and I was also hearing some interesting things about from individuals that I am not acquainted, and I'm not sure if everyone is already acquainted with each other. But I was thinking about the necessity of being even more creative than before. This is something that I have learned because besides being a coordinator, I constantly work with children and teenagers, and they constantly challenge me to be creative because children, despite being bored, they're going to make you aware of this, and there are this requires to be creative. My intervention was very much in that sense, the sense of respectfully inviting everyone to enforce the creativity that in this context entails connecting and discussing more between each other, supporting each other more because access to resources are lessened, staffing has been reduced, but this doesn't mean that the necessities of the population have been reduced. So this would be my intervention. Thank you, AD and I believe that Irka requested the microphone, and the IM. If we could perhaps limit this to 3 minutes, I propose a 10 minute break to grab a cup of coffee. So we're gonna have 2 3 minute interventions, and then we're gonna grab a snack. Yes, my name is Silvia Siria, and I am a Nicaraguan refugee in Costa Rica, and I work for Irka Casa Abierta. I would like to echo the intervention that Mr. Juan Carlos Sáenz had, where he said that everything is built in our minds and how migrants in a global level are being seen, as Anna mentioned, as a plague, as a risk. And I would like to also echo the World Economic Forum and its words on the global risks in 2024, which places as a global risk and this is the forced displacement because nobody migrates because they want. We have been forced to migrate, and in the case of Nicaraguans, it is more than known why many professionals have had to leave our land behind, and we have had to try to overcome. Uh, and in this report, where more than 80% of individuals have this mindset, it would be really important for us in IRCA to work with statistics and data. What are the contributions that migrants give to every different country, not only Costa Rica, because we are mobilized to contribute with culture and knowledge, as it was very well mentioned. But another reflection that I have always thought is that immigration is not something that is fought at the borders, and it's not going to be stopped with all those programs. It's going to be stopped in the countries of origin because the immigration takes place there, whether these are called forced displacements, involuntary immigration. At the end of the day, it's the same. Displaced individuals who are not able to remain in their countries of origin. So I would like to start seeing publications. So it's just as we have reports stating that migrants are perceived as risks in different countries, reports on how they contribute, because this is going to help remove this stigmatization and make it possible for us to establish dialogues that are truly effective and that are not just left in paper. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to wrap up with this close dialogue with a 3-minute intervention from our colleagues from the IOM. Hola Miranda from the IOM. I didn't want to leave the opportunity pass, since our colleague spoke about childhood, to present and expose a good practice that doesn't come from the IOM. Unilaterally, it's a good practice that was accomplished by the Collective Construction for Peace program that we have carried out with our colleagues from UNHCR. And just as our previous colleague was mentioning, it is something very obvious, but when speaking about building peace, my apologies, but we cannot leave aside women's participation, and the voice of women in the communities is indispensable to achieve this. So one of the good practices that we have been able to identify in this collective project that are still being carried out, we call it the traveling clubhouse, which is something that we did along with World Vision to have these daycares free of cost for women, so that they could continue participating in all the sessions, workshops, preparational programs, and at the same time to have peace of mind in participating with their children right next to them. And the children have been part of this program, have been voices, they have been opinions, in order to change dialogue so that they don't reproduce this dialogue when they become adults. So this practice, despite its simplicity, having a daycare center has allowed all three agencies to not lose the participation of these women leaders in the communities, and we have also had presence of men, but majoritarily we have women participating, and it's been them who have helped UNHCR. You also have Senderos here, the IOM, and they have contributed with all of the ideas. So the fruits that we're going to have from this program of peaceful coexistence has been thanks to the participation of these women who were able to participate, who were had access to these daycare centers, and because also we were able to include the youth population in these processes. So despite how small this might seem, this has been very fruitful to us. So I didn't want to leave the opportunity pass to share this good practice into how to maintain the inclusion of women in these processes. Thank you to the colleagues of the IOM. We're going to wrap up with the first segment here. We have a 10 minute to grab a cup of coffee, a snack, and let's meet back here in 10 minutes. Please bring your snack and cup of coffee to the table so that we can resume on time. Everyone can find their seats. We are going to be resuming in 5 minutes. We thank everyone for finding your seats in order to kick off with our second segment. Thank you, everyone. We are now kicking off with the second segment, which will onboard opportunities and limitations for participation of displaced, forcefully displaced individuals, including the perspectives of youth and gender for the second segment. We're going to have a similar dynamic with three interventions from the floor, an open dialogue for organizations of up to 20 minutes, and we are going to have some closing remarks. The University for Peace has also hosted a lunch for all of us, which is going to be served by the end of the event. As I was mentioning, we are now going to reflect all the different manners to strengthen intersectoral collaboration for more just, inclusive, and peaceful societies. In order to start with these, we're going to hear Ranjan Valverde from the United Nations Program for Development. Thank you very much. Good morning. I am truly grateful with the University of the Peace and the High Commissioner for Refugees for the invitation, for gathering us, and for the opportunity to share some experiences and ideas in these matter. My colleague Pamela from the IOM may touch on some specific topics on the execution of a project that we're collectively developing in the northern border cantons of Costa Rica, and it is important to share this experience because despite the fact that results and actions might seem intuitive, this is an innovative exercise and has products and dynamics that are not typical. We understand that in the northern border cantons, we find risks in peaceful coexistence, and these are mainly focused in fostering communities that are sustained in prejudices that don't have any foundation. And that is the truth. We have to say this clearly because the majority of motivational causes for violence in these communities are based upon prejudices that don't have any foundation. These mentioned cantons that Benut is updating year after year are showing some serious weaknesses and risks for the generation of opportunities for individuals accessing services of quality, services of education, drinkable water, and an effective response from institutions. It's not the same thing to live in the coast or in the northern bordering communities than living in the metropolitan area. We have different realities that don't allow us to understand that it is a very unequal context. We understand that at a national level, the deterioration of national security from the highest authorities are often explained or blamed on immigration and the deterioration of capacities in humans to find work, uh, become entrepreneurs are also determined by immigration, and we have to deconstruct these type of messages and create evidence to show that the history shows something different. These are two structural problems that serve as alibis for institutions to explain their inefficiencies. So it becomes easier to tell them or to say that the problem is with the humans that are being mobilized. The Secretary for Peace, IOM, UNHCR, and PNUD. We work along with the participation of communities and local stakeholders in these bordering cantons, such as La Cruz, Upala, and Los Chiles. But we also have Watuso and La Cruz, which have been incorporated into the development of the project. We have participatively designed a project that fortunately was intuitively approved in however, we have problems of violence and coexistence that fortunately we have made visible to the general secretary. I am short on time, but I would like to highlight some important results that we believe need to be highlighted. First being the articulation of the United Nations work, which is not only a political or administrative matter, it is a conceptual matter in its background. We work in our organization that is the cornerstone, which is human rights for the United Nations. But our specialization in that, we deconstruct that concept and work with certain fragments, and we don't see the integrality of human rights. This collective work, along with UNHCR, IOM, and PNUD, has allowed us to supplement in order to generate responses to challenges of human rights in the territories. This is an important conclusion. Also, one of the big challenges that we find in the territories is the local policies and its management. There is a reversed relationship between the municipal management capacities and the richness in the territory. So these are cantons that have limited access to certain resources. Therefore, their capacities to respond to challenges are lesser, but they are very enthusiastic. We have found great commitment in most of the cantons in their local governments. So we have participated and promoted along with work that UNHCR and ACNUR had already developed in the territories by strengthening local leaders to discuss local policies that have implemented, have been designed, and are being carried out. And this is very important because these are the municipalities' maps, but not developed by technicians at a desk, but with ample participation of individuals. I want to share that even in the region of Upala, we were cautious because we have the conviction of specifically including the participation of the Maleco indigenous territory because we needed to hear their voice in particular. So it's not only a project that tries to find the necessities of fostered communities or the human mobility, but also seeing the necessities of the campus as a whole. It is about generating coexistence and at a community level we constructed collective solutions for coexistence. There are differentiated challenges for coexistence in each community. Sometimes these are not the same. Sometimes there are risks for coexistence, but they are not the same risks everywhere. So we generated spaces for discussion to generate these solutions and some type of financing to implement them. Some were sports related spaces for coexistence, for dialogue, for decision making, or for solutions that are lacking, and communities that have many necessities don't have this, and the project allowed for this to happen. We find this truly fundamental. Pamela mentioned this earlier, but I would like to highlight it once more because it is truly critical to have women significantly participating in decision making spaces at a community level, which is why collectively we have thought about necessities and we had support from World Vision to implement an idea that we had been developing for spaces for daycare that would not only tend to children, but would also generate opportunities for women to be able to participate. Because I truly don't have to explain to this group how overburdened women are with domestic work and childcare. So this generated opportunities for significant participation of women and there are topics that I would also like to highlight, for example, generating improved capacities in local governments to carry out and implement public policies. I think that one of the most innovative things of the project is generating an early alert system to human risk, which we have been developing with the communities and the municipalities, and along with the Technological Institute of Costa Rica. PNUD has had prior experience with developing early alert systems, but in this particular case, along with IOM, UNHCR, the municipalities, and the communities, we have generated the identification of those risks that are not properly managed at a local level because it is not known who is obligated to provide response. And what we have had is a reactive action from municipalities, for example, contamination of water. Who responds? Who has to go? ASADA, AYA. Who has to go there? Who goes back to the territory to resolve the issue? And sometimes the municipality is overburdened by these problems, but they have an obligation of local management. So these early alert systems has a series of indicators, but also solution routes to state if this is happening or this is beginning to happen, we can put a halt to it on time and these national authorities have to be summoned and for them to respond to these necessities. And this is important because sometimes these tools are not at a local level to receive government response. So this has allowed to connect the subnational context with the national context by strengthening the multi-level governance. And I would also like to highlight that the project, I am definitely not doing an exhaustive accountability report because we have had great results, but I would like to give visibility to some things that we find important. But I believe that what we have to highlight the most and what needs to make us feel best about this is that we have been able to accompany processes that were already on track, such as territorial conversation tables for planning in the cantons, which are governance mechanisms that had a life of their own and that we have been able to support. Because the most relevant thing is that the this is for the decision making to consider the communities and for nobody to speak for them or in their behalf and for them to be considered and truly heard. not as a checklist, but for them to be the protagonists in this decision making, but in their diversity, not only men, not only women, but all the population, for the population in human mobility to not be excluded and to have full participation of individuals that have social participation in the different dynamics. And this also means giving protagonism to the youth, which are often excluded, and building solutions from top to bottom implicates including individuals in these processes. This is a collective work that has recognized and strengthened the role of municipalities, which is truly fundamental, but also other local stakeholders, civil society organizations. I am not going to name them one by one. We have Flaxo, we have Hyatt, we have a series of organizations that in the local context have added to the efforts, and we have had the airport to accompany efforts that they started. And in the very difficult context that we're living, it becomes necessary to try to find coincidence in efforts and the best coordination possible to be as effective in managing resources, but also to have um, major impact and results with the population and objectives that at the end of the day are inspiring the work that we all carry out in the territories. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Randall from Canute. We are now going to hear Mr. Roberto Blanco, the Bercer Projects Director. Good morning. Good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to thank for the invitation and I celebrate this important linkage between academics, the humanitarian sector, and civil society. It's always a pleasure to come back to my alma mater, to the University for Peace, which I was at 2022 graduation in conflict resolution. It is a pleasure to be here. And now, when speaking about limitation and opportunities for refugees, displaced individuals, and those who are in a situation of mobility, it becomes fundamental to speak about the significant participation that they can have in different spaces, which is why I broadly celebrate these gathering. The decision making around refugees and stateless individuals is fundamental in the creation of real and practical mechanisms that are based in proved facts regarding who, for whom would be better than to participate in this than these interested communities. And I recognize the strengthening of capacities initiatives and that inform communities in leadership, negotiations, civic participation, and in the development of our communities and fostering countries. It was precisely here in the University for Peace, thanks to scholarships that was directed the refugees, which I was able to have this PhD. The youth program is carried out within the University for Peace within their own structure, but that is also limited, particularly because of access to resources and there should be a higher level from the private sector, international cooperation, and other stakeholders in order to guarantee a higher access and impact more individuals and increase their capacities. Secondly, I can mention, as my previous colleague said, the inclusion in public policies of displaced and refugee individuals and refugees and the incorporation of our voices in the formulation of public policies can highlight and it can result in solutions that are more adjusted to realities. And it is important to have incidency in their preparation and follow up. I can also mention the practical experiences and using the best of practical experiences from displaced and refugees who lead civil society organizations, improved on-field work in the sector of protection, healthcare, um, in order to increase the impact that we exercise. And the challenges that I identify with so many challenges present, I would say one of them is the lack of representation. There aren't enough mechanisms in order to guarantee that the voices of refugees are going to be represented in spaces for decision making, which is why I started celebrating this event in this space, and hopefully you can expand these to other key sectors such as work tables that are linked to different state stakeholders at a national level. And I have to sincerely recognize the efforts of UNHCR, which throughout the last few years has been carrying out an effort for the significant participation of refugees in spaces such as this one. Another challenge to highlight is the lack of trust and the stigmatization. In the 21st century, there are still prejudices and lack of trust towards refugees and migrants and displaced individuals. Um, and in whatever context of human mobility. And this creates a hostile environment that limits our participation, particularly in these times when negative narratives are being developed towards population and human mobility that are trying to be normalized in societies. We have to fight this day after day with data, with work, and with the essential contribution of individuals of displaced and humans in mobility to the economies and whatnot. Mr. Rojas also mentioned it in his opening remarks. The international system is under attack, and peace is a weak state. Peace is built day after day, and what we can do in this is that facing these challenges, we need to continue progressing as a network collectively. From the Venezuela Alliance, we have an initiative called Coalition for Venezuela, which is a federation that groups more than 100 civil society organizations, NGOs, foundations, with the goal of defending human rights and the promotion of integration of individuals in human mobility throughout the continent, with presence from Canada to Argentina and some European countries. And this has allowed us to exercise incidency based on evidence in different action levels, local, national, and international levels. We participate in different regional mechanisms and platforms such as the Quito process, the MIPS, and the R4B platform, and the civil society mechanism of the Organization of American States. We are also part of PROLAC. PROLAC is an effort led by the Danish Council for Refugees and Norwegian Council for Refugees, of which we're a part of, and it is basically a harmonized monitoring system for protection in the region, which is utilized to detect and analyze risks in protection. And through these tools, in a study that we carried out from December 2024 to March 2025, we were able to identify in Costa Rica that the main risks of protection are access to the refugee system, access lack of access to documentation, and this of course entails other problems such as access to healthcare, basic services, access to education, banking systems, between others. Discrimination and racism, xenophobia continue to be a transversal risk that is on the rise, and it is concerning because we see this more and more installed in media outlets and in the society. Now, in order to explore future paths for intersectorial collaborations, we have to remember that Costa Rica, in the frame of the Second World Forum for Refugees, assumed a series of national, regional, and thematic commitments. For example, in the MIPS of in the framework MIPS, it's stated the strengthening of the asylum system and the way in which we civil societies organizations can contribute to is working and contributing as a network and determining how we can strengthen this asylum system, which we know is in a very precarious situation at the time for different reasons that we're all very aware of. At a thematic level, it agreed to increase the participation of local governments and strengthening the interinstitutional coordination for the integration of refugees in fostering communities. From the Venceda Alliance, we are currently in a consultation process with different local governments in order to strengthen the technical strengthening of their staffing and also for individuals in human mobility that they are attending to and that due to lack of funding are not receiving attention any longer. These commitments were agreed by Costa Rica in the Second World Forum of Refugees, in which I had the opportunity of participating. And in that context, many of the refugees, more than 320 refugees there present, I think the first time where we had such a number of refugees working in present in this forum, we thought about an initiative that sought to implement a follow-up traceability mechanism that would be able to see from civil society all different commitments that different states were taking on. And this looks six that from different countries we're able to verify with our governments, with our states, which commitments were agreed and verification process, which is a work from for UNHCR, which has the technical capacity to do so, but from civil society. Besides this proved operational capacities on field that for many years we have gathered and accumulated, we are also able to participate in this sense. In order to finalize and not delay the meeting any longer, I would just like to leave out a message in these times of difficulty and crisis. As we are all aware, in this context in which negative narratives, dangerous narratives are being developed against migrants and refugees, it is the time for civil society organizations, NGOs, to join efforts and work collectively with common objectives and to link up more with local governments, with the academia, with the private sector, because together our voices are going to resonate more, and we have to have common causes, and that in these different times, difficult times, these are necessary for everyone to mobilize collectively and act in consequence. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roberto, for your reflection and analysis. Now, in representation of the Costa Rican Chamber of Commerce, we're going to now be hearing to Mr. Jacobo Riva. Thank you. Very well. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, perhaps. I'm not sure what time it is. Maybe time for lunch, right? From the Chamber of Commerce of Costa Rica, we wanted to share a little bit about our good practices and commitments with refugees and refugee applicants for several years, and during the pandemic, we were able to have an understanding letter with UNHCR, which has allowed us to have constant initiatives during even since before the pandemic, but with more intention and commitment since the pandemic. It has truly been an adventure to generate employment. Is something that we have focused on in 2020 and 2021. I'm not particularly sure of the year. There was some international cooperation funds to create formal sources of employment, and there was a certain amount for 150 sources of employment, and we were very close to losing that funding, and it was really a shame because it allowed companies, especially small and medium-sized companies, to um, hire and finance 3 months of social security for the new employee. Okay, yes, much better, much more audible. Thank you. Um, UNHCR had this funding available, and what we did is that we summoned the majority of companies possible at the time. We had responses from RG Holdings, Automercado, and other associates from companies of different sizes. And one of these companies in commerce hired 9 individuals that year. And from that initiative, 21 sources of employment were able to be generated. And this brought a lot of joy because these were 21 individuals who were going to access work, and hopefully they were going to be able to remain there after the first quarter, and in celebrating inclusion, which is something that we have traced in this last few years. One of these companies doesn't have 9 individuals by this point. It has more than 200. So it's been a very interesting initiative, and it really summoned willingness and understanding from the private sector. I believe that if companies understand, are able to understand the value of hiring refugees, given their talents, their capacities, given their resilience, that in this time, resilience is the second ability with most demand from a study of the World Economic Forum. And if understood that refugees have bring a high amount of stability, flexibility, and resilience and agility, the companies find in them not only the possibility of having a hiring that is more durable, because in commerce rotation is truly painful. We have sometimes even up to a 40% of monthly rotation. So you can imagine this when analyzing a company with 2,000 employees, almost half of their employees are leaving every year. So this is when a point in which refugees play an important role from our perspective, because they are more stable, and the work that is going to be offered to them is going to be tremendously valued, maybe even more than a local. And Let's see what else I can share. We have work tirelessly in teaching companies on how the process of hiring a refugee is supposed to go, because it's one of the barriers that we first need to knock down. The companies can have willingness to be inclusive, can have strategies for inclusion, but perhaps they lack information to be able to carry out the inclusion of refugees. And we have worked along with HIAS, with UNHCR, in informing companies in what is the process to do said inclusion. And lastly, a reflection that as the Chamber of Commerce we have is always appealing to our commitment to the development of the country. And it states that we are in a time of reflection of the country that we have to maneuver. This is the country that we have to maneuver, not the one that we want, with the different variables that Costa Rica has. Last week we had a weekend with Mr. Mario Zamora, Minister of Security, and the one of the chiefs of police. I don't remember his name at this time, but he was one of the chiefs of National Police Force, and they were telling us that Costa Rica is no longer the the Costa Rica that we met. And when you hear those words, and after hearing everything that the minister was telling us, we had an aftertaste of pain, of uncertainty, and if that is the reality that we're living, where the country changed, our security changed, our populational mix changed. As a chamber, we reflect a little bit upon this. What cultural and social changes we are having to maneuver in order to have incidents in some manner in the ways in which the companies are responding to this new reality. And as previously mentioned by our colleague here, um, hopefully this is something that can be resolved in the countries of origin, and democracy can be restored in countries where these dictatorships are causing so much harm to the region. I believe that we have to be brave and preserve our democracy, but also be solidary, and also call the international community to have some type of incidents so that this cancer that is eating us away leaves our region, because it hasn't brought any positive outcomes and will not have any positive outcomes ever. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jacobo, and thank you, Chamber of Commerce, for being present. Now we have Mr. Joshua Martinez is going to reflect upon the challenges for the participation of refugees from the experience of the Intercultural Association of Human Rights, ASIDEO. Thank you, Irving, and thank you all for listening. I apologize for speaking twice. I am definitely a talker, but sometimes there is a necessity from invisible sectors, whether these are youth, diverse communities, or refugees such as myself, who really need to take up these spaces. And I really invite everyone to take up these spaces because it is necessary. We have important actions to highlight. Most importantly, what is being discussed today. We have demonstrated today that there are opportunities for improvement and through many actions. Many spoke about the reinvention being strategic. Others talked about coalitions, and sitting down and working together as organizations. And before I expose what I wanted to mention, I would like to also say that from ASIDEO, one of the initiatives that we are working on is the celebration of dialogue tables on immigration and refuge, which currently brings in 28 different national, international cooperation associations which work in the protection of individuals under human mobility, for which we would like to invite the organizations to participate in this space in view of the necessity of joining forces, of working collectively in coordinate actions. There is a necessity to reinvent ourselves, but in order to do so, we need to understand what the problem is. First thing being we have a regression in terms of human rights at a global scale, and this regression is tackling us here in Costa Rica. Costa Rica that has always been a pillar of human rights and that has opened its doors in multiple occasions to the migrant population, but that in some way this affectation of the global regression is seen in this territory, and that we need to pay close mind to. We have thousands of individuals with irregular immigration conditions, some that are not even able to insert themselves at even the most minimum spaces, which leave them exposed in manners such as the following: being the impossibility to join labor markets in a regular fashion due to the lack of immigration documentation, or a partial incorporation without guarantees or without minimum wages, exposing them to precarious conditions of work that are sometimes even linked to forms of modern slavery. The orienting them in to choose between eating or having dignified roof over their heads. Many of these individuals that are under this immigration irregularity becomes such a challenge to include them. The regularization process are living in overcrowded slums and in properties that have been taken by force to build a small plastic wooden shack to be able to survive it, paying for very expensive leases because there is no budget. Basically, just because of the lack of having an immigration document that doesn't allow to join the liberal market. This implicates that many children, youth, are not even able to enroll in schools, a very important challenge that is linked to education in hospitals, and this has been proved, documented, and publicly denounced. You are not seeing if you don't have an immigration document for identification. We have reported deaths of individuals because of their rejection to access healthcare at hospitals, and the justification that is always presented to us is that the person did not even have a refugee applicant card. They didn't have insurance despite the obligation that they have to attend to any individual undergoing an emergency, regardless of their condition, documentation, or whatnot. This not being regularized implicates that migrants are not able to access their rights. Thousands are not able to access their regularization process and documents because the legal system does not allow them to. However, in the previous table that we mentioned, we exposed why this isn't allowed, and it's because the system doesn't have a true, real capacity. There is no capacity from the immigration institutions to tend to the high and exaggerated amounts of mobilized population that are requesting their documentation. So we have a fundamental challenge in how to attend to this regularization in institutions and allow them to access information and supporting the immigration community, supporting them from our different networks. But we also identified other problem, the different cuts in budget. We had a global cut cutting on a global scale for humanitarian assistance, and many of these organizations provide assistance to immigration institutions such as UNHCR with their refugee unit, which allows them with part of their staff in order to try to alleviate these necessities of the population in an attempt to increase their capacities. But we have seen with these financing cuts, these have been reduced. We recognize that these budgeting cuts have made it so that the legal attention and humanitarian attention systems have reduced their capacities or to simply collapse, um, making them disappear and making it so that many organizations have had to close their offices, like La Salle, ANADIR, the National Association for the Defense of Refugees' Rights, and our offices, ASIDEO, we had to do a technical shutdown for lack of resources. This has forced us to reinvent ourselves and operate from different initiatives with the little or non-existent resources that we have based on our capacities. Some points to highlight would be: what can we do for these people to receive attention in our absence? I am going to show an example. We facilitated to the refugee unit for a time. the provision of the Mosquito Mayagna, Uyurba, and Creole translation services. An interpreter was assisting them, but we did not have the resources to maintain this over time. Those resources were going to run out at any given moment. So, as an alternative, the refugee application form was translated to Mosquito, and this was provided to the refugee unit of the immigration office, which you heard before, and also the immigration office has been truly receptive and assisted the community with this differentiated process and action with little resources that has a great impact. By not having funding, all of the efforts for social inclusion are cut for assisting them in legal matters, and of course, any effort on peaceful coexistence, for which we have another important risk, because unfortunately, without resources, limitations increase. The lack of resources, when speaking about the transsexual community, has made it so that this population has been has been pushed to sexual work, which unfortunately is not well seen by the community and generates erroneous ideas on the migrational population, and it increases the stigmatization of transsexual humans and and their beliefs that they're only good for sexual works. The campaigns against xenophobia have become more and more difficult to work on because there are no resources to support them. The media outlets do not want to provide free access to these campaigns that should actually be free of cost and of public access. And at the same time, when speaking about battling this, when we have an executive power that speaks against the migrant population, not only in Costa Rica, but in general, this is definitely not supportive. It is not useful to speak about battling xenophobia when we don't have the resources and when we do not receive support or spaces from the government. We have opportunities, some of them we have highlighted, such as collective work, organized work, approaching the government. We have had opportunities to approach government institutions such as the Immigration and Foreign Office, which at a given time you probably heard of the 43810 decree, which greatly affected refugees and refugee and asylum applicants, and there was a lot of incidency, so that these reform would guarantee human rights. And thank you to the receptivity of the immigration office, different reform was able to be implemented. And it was at the immigration office that they had the idea for NGOs to support the immigration processes as external collaborators. So this approach to the government has already been legalized through norms, and this allows us to have the opportunity to approach them and support said institution as collaborators, of course, with the green light of this opportunity. Approaching donors is something that we can also highlight from the table of dialogue of immigration and refugee, to which I invite you all to incorporate yourselves in. We have had 5 formal sessions and some extraordinary sessions to deal with topics of interest. And very interestingly would be to document all these affectations, everything that is happening to us currently, to have enough foundation to complain, because we can go meet with embassies, international institutions, and tell them this is what's happening to us. They're going to ask for proof. Where are the documents? How do you support these claims? And I would also like to invite you, lastly, to join the efforts of the stable that I mentioned in a polling effort that we are carrying out in order for key information to be provided regarding affectations to the migrant community, humanitarian attention, and others, in order to present this polling report to the international community and tell them these things are happening, these are the conclusions, and we recommend you to do this and this. In the same manner, another opportunity for improvement, making best of the approximation of the state that we have in this. There's an institution called Parlamericas, which is the Parliament of the Americas, where different legislators of the Latin American level and Canada meet together. And this structure created in October of 2024, a declaration in which lawmakers committed themselves to work in pro of the rights of migrants with 24 different bullet points. So I invite you all to read this declaration and push legislators in Costa Rica to accomplish what they promised. Thank you, Asileo. We're now going to hear Ana Quiroz from CISO.
Gracias. Yo
Thank you.
quisiera señalar que Costa Rica
I'd like to point out that
tiene muchísimas
Costa Rica has many advantages and has made progress in his documents and legislations
que pueden catalogarse
which can be cataloged as forward moving. And this is something that has to be recognized. The concrete problem is that not many individuals are aware of these documents. There is an integrative immigration policy.
en la primera 2013,
The first taking place between 2013 and 2023, and the second between 2024 to 2034.
y cuando se
And when
población en general, sino
not the population in general, but when the authorities are inquired, they are completely unaware of what said policies propose. So, to whom are those policies beneficial for? Probably to consultants. Probably the consultants who received good payment in redacting those. But for refugees, for migrants, and for public employees, these are not useful at all. We are in a year of pre-election or already electoral year in Costa Rica.
a quienes nos ha tocado
And for those of us who have had to live different electoral changes in the country, we know that between one administration and the following, everything that was done previously is erased and disappears, and all of the work that we do from organizations and groups of interest is also lost. And we have to begin the following year almost from scratch, despite the fact that in some cases the public employees are the same. However, they are, by that case, obeying a different person, hopefully a woman, but it's not we don't see in the horizon any possible woman to take up the administration. But we do identify different speeches that reproduce prejudices, xenophobia, and discrimination. And in electoral periods, this is worsened
algunas de las autoridades
because some of the authorities are the ones that reproduce these prejudices the most. For example, when it was said that COVID was coming from Nicaragua and that Nicaragua was the main enemy of Costa Rica during the COVID-19 pandemic,
yo creo que
I
aquí tuvimos
believe that we had a tremendously positive experience in 2018 and 2019,
que fue
which was led by PNUD, and that was not picked up ever again. And we never met up again to discuss and speak about the problems, but most importantly, about what to do in collection. I believe that we should really be demanding the United Nations instances and government instances for these dialogues to be picked up again. Because we learned a lot of the different problems that we were facing and what to do with them. So it's time to pick those efforts up again. On another hand, discrimination and xenophobia that we are finding in the national staffing, which prevents, despite what the law states. For example, in Peacefull, there are children who are not allowed to integrate themselves into the education sector. This can only disappear if the state takes drastic measures in relation to this. If we continue to remain simply on declarations and we don't implement sanctions, exemplary sanctions to these public employees who are willing to condemn children to ignorance, to poverty, and to live under marginalized conditions, we are going to continue seeing these manifestations over and over. It's been enough of laws, enough declarations, enough measures that serve only as makeup. It is time to implement radical actions to eliminate these different forms of discrimination. Same as with uh, accessing healthcare. If the health staff that condemns individuals to death is not sanctioned, individuals who are going to their emergency services and that are being rejected, we will continue having deaths simply for lack due to lack of access to healthcare systems. And it is definitely important for the work towards sensitivity in public institutions to start by recognizing, first of all, that immigration is not a burden, but also that immigration is something that is diverse and that contributes systematically to our national life. I would like to invite to pick up coordination and collective action, not only with declarations, but also, and most importantly, through actions. And besides this, to work so that positive experiences, and just recently I heard about a project uh, 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 from Mi de Plan, ISEED, and other instances that entailed millions in order to promote access to healthcare systems and dignifying sources of employment, and that, according to reports, shared very important experiences and proposals, but that the majority of us here present are unaware of. We are lacking more dissemination and more information about what is happening and what is being done in this country. Thank you, Ms. Anna, for your intervention. To wrap up with this segment, we're going to be hearing Harold Villegas, a professor and investigator of the University of Ferguson and coordinator of the 738 project, which is addressed for migrants and refugees. Good afternoon to everyone present. I would like to thank UNHCR, the University for Peace, for this invitation. Small reflection, and given the fact that we find ourselves at the University for Peace, by reassessing the last few months, there has been an increase in violations to human rights in dictatorial regimes. And this really has to bring us to reflection, meaning the threats for mixed movements today are not only found in authoritarian regimes, as I have mentioned before. These are being committed against in all diversities in even within democratic systems. And given the fact that we are the University for Peace, and remembering Johan Carlton, who used to say that peace is not only the lack of armed conflicts, but that the peace is the absence of structural violence, which is very much related to accessing education, healthcare systems, dignifying sources of work, and the respect to the individual's dignity. And in that sense, I believe that there is an ethical obligation, historical obligation from the academia in making contributions that are not only knowledge based, but also in how to have incidency and how to carry out transformation. The knowledge is not only the search for truth. Truth is definitely sought for in universities, and universities have a fundamental role in transforming and having incidency in the societies that they are a part of. And I believe that the academia and very importantly the University of Costa Rica, which is also under external and internal threats, has this historic task as a stakeholder for transformation in different public policies throughout the history of Costa Rica. And this is why we have decided from the University of Costa Rica and from the Political Sciences School to give visibility to the mixed movements, which is which entails refugees, refugee applicants, stateless individuals, forced displaced individuals, and also all versions of immigration. And in that, as you know, the university has three different areas, which are the substantive areas, which is teaching, investigation and research, and social action. The communal work are framed under the social action that the university takes. But everything is interrelated because we teach and we also carry out research, and this community work is directed to have incidents in public policies that are related to mixed movements. And we have established different working teams with students. This is a multidisciplinary community work that also allows us to provide and teach sensitivity to professionals in Costa Rica in terms of this division and assimilation on education, accessing healthcare, and accessing the work market, and also the traceability of agreements for a regular and dignifying immigration, and also the World Pact for Refugees. And also, we are working in the construction of the idea of having a type of observatory at the university that can approach the migrational topic. Therefore, we want and we have attempted for this communal work with the students at the University of Costa Rica to not only be a testimonial work only or an academic work on its own, but for it to have real incidency in the public policies of Costa Rica, fundamentally in education, healthcare, and accessing the labor market. Now, in terms of challenges, well, you are very much aware that there is a negative context. There is not only a political vision of repression against the migrants. So we have to work not only against an ideological vision that has become a tendency in the region and worldwide against migrants or any type of mixed movement, but also with all the limitations that have been, or that they have attempted to introduce in the Costa Rican state, particularly in the fiscal and economic perspective, which makes it difficult for the state of Costa Rica to be able to guarantee human rights to everyone. For example, in the topic of healthcare and social insurance, which seems very obvious, but is still fundamental. If it hadn't been for UNHCR and their support, thousands of refugee applicants wouldn't have had access to healthcare as a fundamental right. Now, if we go throughout other areas, we find similar scenarios. I believe that sometimes there is a lack of resources, but sometimes it's also a matter of lack of political willingness in not recognizing migrants as part of the community. Lastly, I believe that it is fundamental the work that we have carried out with NGOs. I believe that the migrational topic has to be led by the state, and we cannot replace the function of the state when approaching mixed movements, which is why it is important to have incidency in public policy. But I believe that supplementary to this, the work of NGOs has been fundamental, many of which that have worked with us already, and just basically that would be the summary of it. I would like to have some type of linkage with NGOs that we haven't been able to work with yet to see how we can establish common areas for cooperation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harold. With this intervention, we're going to be wrapping up with the second segment. We're a little bit past time, and we have several or individuals and organizations that would like to speak. So I would really like to ask of all of you to keep interventions at a maximum length of 3 to 4 minutes, so that we can have our closing segment and also enjoying the lunch that the University for Peace very graciously has prepared for all of us. Now I'd like to provide the microphone to Cindy Molina, Chief of the Refugee Unit at the Immigration and Foreign Direction Office, to hear her contribution. Good afternoon. It is a true pleasure to be able to share with all of these organizations with whom at some point we have been able to have some type of interaction of sorts. Um, from our part of the Direction of Immigration and Foreign Affairs, we have attempted to provide a differentiated service since 2023. At the end of 2023, along with UNHCR, we tried to propose some way to more efficiently tend to the refugee applications that are presented to us. And thanks to the collaboration of UNHCR since May 16th of last year, if I'm not mistaken, we presented to Mr. Mario Zamora, our Minister of Security, and to other individuals who joined us, a strategy to tend um, and we are short on time to be able to explain what this strategy entails and all of its different axles, but we could briefly mention what this strategy, which is tending to the 221,000 files that we have pending. And from all of these records and files, there are many individuals who are not interested in continuing their process because they missed their eligibility appointment. We calculate that there are at approximately 26,000 individuals who find themselves in this situation, and thanks to UNHCR support, we were able to hire an IT specialist who has been able to help us develop resolutions that collectively have brought closure to these cases where the individual has not continued with their process and where individuals missed their appointments. Since December to March, we have been able to carry out 3,900 resolutions, which is not a big number compared to the 221,000 that I mentioned. However, these 3,000 have been confectionated by one single individual. So we are looking for mechanisms that are going to try to tend in a more efficient fashion to these applications, and also with UNHCR support, And of course, with all the different parameterizations that we have implemented in order to improve service, we were able to increase the amount of appointments in order to attend to a higher number of refugee applicants. By the end of 2023, we had approximately 350 appointments per week. And despite that, we have had cuts in our staffing and the funding that UNHCR handles, we still have approximately double of that because we are attending to 720 applications on a weekly basis only in San Jose, without considering the fact that in San Carlos and Paso Canoa's new applications are received every day. So you are more than invited to visit our refuge unit. We have with the MIRP funding, we renewed the service platform in order to provide a more integrative and efficient attention to those who require this international protection in Costa Rica. I have many things to share. Unfortunately, time is scarce, so I am going to hand over the microphone of the Direction of Immigration and Foreign Affairs. Good afternoon. In a very brief manner, just echo what Ms. Cindy has said. As the General Direction of Immigration and Foreign Affairs, we have carried out a series of efforts. We are all very much aware that the migrational dynamic is ever changing. It is not easy to determine patterns because this is a social issue where there's a series of factors that can contribute to it. And as we have seen since 2015, 2016, the dynamic in Costa Rica has been quite brisk with immigration movements and diverse displacements. Um, Costa Rica, with the Pact on Immigration and other international commitments that we have assumed, we count with different secretariats and presidencies. We have the Secretary of CORED, the regional office for um, human trafficking and migrant trafficking. We have SICA and CRM also present. And this has become tremendously important because these mechanisms help us create alliances and partnerships with countries in our region and therefore coordinate in a closer manner many topics that are very much related to immigration. Now, regarding the topic of stateless individuals, in connection with the Minister for Exterior Relations, we are working on establishing a working table to bring more harmony to all of the processes in order to provide the category of stateless individual to a person. Um, as you all know, this is a very important topic that perhaps hasn't been dealt with enough in spaces, and which is why we thank the invitation to be a part of these space because it is important to place this on the table from the direction. We're doing all possible efforts to harmonize these, empower it, and amplify it a little bit more, and guarantee the rights of individuals, which is what I believe brings us all together today. Thank you. Thank you to the Direction of Immigration and Foreign Affairs. Now we're going to hear Jean Batres from the Costa Rican Red Cross. Good afternoon to everyone here present. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, given the time constraint. I personally have been working with the Red Cross for many, many years, and these topics, peace, immigration, human rights, have been something constant throughout my career in these years. One of the situations that perhaps are more recurring in spaces such as this one has been who we know and how we know them. Today, I have come to find out about a lot of organizations of which existence I didn't know about, and perhaps in future meetings, we're going to have other organizations, other leaders present as well. One of the biggest opportunities that I always identify in these spaces is generating synergies between each other, but one of the biggest limitations is how do we get to meet each other? And this has been discussed in different spaces, different forms. We need a space with all institutions, organizations are present, state organizations, private sector, community organizations, nonprofits, where these are characterized in not only in the form of a directory, but by characterizing each of them to try to empower the work that we carry out. As the Red Cross, we face many challenges. In many occasions, we have partnered with some organizations to develop projects to be able to reach certain communities, but turns out sometimes we find organizations in communities that are part of the community and that we didn't have mapped out and that we didn't know what they were doing or if their existence. Can you imagine the power that we would all be able to generate if we could truly empower and boost these collective efforts? How far we could make it and how we would be able to defend human rights. We, as the Red Cross, face many challenges accessing indigenous communities and territories to provide attention to an indigenous person who was bitten by a snake, the one who's sick or has a wound that doesn't heal. Sometimes it takes up to 2 days to access the community, and sometimes the patient's condition doesn't allow for a ground extraction, and we don't have airborne resources. We're currently ongoing a great debate in terms of how to provide attention to these territories and communities, but it doesn't only end there. There are things that we tend to hear in San Jose, in Heredia, in communities where we are sometimes clueless in terms of how to approach and understand this. We have definitely made progress. This is undeniable, and we cannot deny the contributions of migrants to all the countries that they reach. I'm going to pose a very quick example. In 2016, we had one of the worst emergencies of dengue, chikungunya, and Zika, and we met at the Ministry of Health, and Punta Arenas was flooded with cases. And we asked, what can we do? Well, we have a shelter where we have Cuban migrants who are experts in the matter. Let's ask them. And they were delighted. They went and controlled the fumigated vectors in all of Punta Arenas, all of the sector of Chacarita. So the volume is unmeasurable. Costa Rica wouldn't be what it is today without the contributions that migrants have provided this country with. And I say this with a lot of pride. And the United States would not be what it is today without migrants, without Latin American countries. We are countries forged and established by migrants, and we sometimes don't know how to treat migrants. But we have many opportunities for growth. But if we don't join forces, many of these efforts are going to be left isolated, and we're not going to generate impact. Today, many organizations here are taking some homework back with us because we have several projects, but we're only seeing a small part of things here. During the last few years, the amount of organizations has grown, and some are unfortunately invisible. But we need to fight for the rights of every individual. Thank you, Mr. Jim. Now we're going to be hearing for up to 2 to 3 minutes, and we really thank those who are following this transmission through social media. And we ask of you, if you have any intervention, please type it up in the chat, and it's going to be considered for the future publication of these. Now we're going to be hearing Maria Isabel Sanchez from the IOT. Thank you, UNHCR, for the invitation and for the University of Pass for hosting us this morning and afternoon. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Again, I'm going to be very brief. The IOT, the only a three-party agency of the United Nations since its constitution in 1919, promotes social dialogue between governments, workers, and employers, which strengthens cooperation and democratic participation, which are the fundamental pillars for the construction of a culture of peace. To be here in comparison with all of you and to be able to hear through all of the interventions that employment is one of the tools to maintain peace and to contribute to the culture of peace is from the IoT extremely relevant and commits us to continue working on this. From the OIT, we continue contributing to these by promoting social justice, liberal justice, and a culture of peace through an approach that is based on dignifying access to work. Dignifying work includes a dignifying wage, security measures in their place of work, and accessing social protection for workers and their families. So, seeing employment as a tool for social stability and conflict prevention is, for us, one of our priorities. Within these contexts, along with the work that we have carried out with UNHCR, I wanted to mention a good practice that we have identified at a global scale. We maintain an understanding memorandum with which we establish our collective priorities, but also the good practice here is that we have a plan every 2 years, and this plan allows us to assess our collective activities, prioritize them, and provide better follow up. Now we have a collective project for 2023 to 2025, which is focused on promoting dignifying employment for refugees, displaced individuals, and their fostering communities. In the frame of this alliance, several activities have been done with the objective of promoting generation of decent sources of work, and one of these is the certification of liberal competencies. In the frame of MIRPS, we're carrying out the design of these regional strategy for the certification of different competencies and for prior knowledge of migrants and refugees can be recognized in their fostering countries. Just as that, one of the priorities of this collective work is for the recollection of data and its use for more effective policies. And in this sense, I wanted to mention that from the ILO, we are doing a study on social security in which we systematize the regional experience referring to progress and challenges of international agreements that intend to contribute in the recognition and in guaranteeing of social rights. Based on this analysis in 2024, we started working collectively along with UNHCR in an idea that has now turned into a pilot and with which we're going to be able to identify the contributional trajectory of refugees, men and women in Costa Rica, also very much aligned with what was mentioned in several of the interventions in providing visibility to such contributions. We all know that there is a certain understanding or prejudice that the migrants don't contribute to their communities, but with having concrete data and information and the data that has been supplied to us by the Costa Rican Social Security Administration, which is a key stakeholder, we're going to be able to determine what is that trajectory and set contributions. That would be all from my part. Thank you. Thank you, Maria Isabel. Now we are going to be wrapping up with the interventions. So we appreciate briefness in your interventions. Now we're going to be hearing Ms. Alejandra Lopez from Prilaca. Good afternoon. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be present here. The dignifying social and cultural economic integration of the indigenous population in Costa Rica is facing particular challenges, such as any other migrant communities. We have important challenges that we face, but the indigenous community does more so in particular. And with civil society organizations present in Costa Rica, first of all, I would like to mention some opportunities that we have been able to take advantage of and that have been mentioned. First of all, is the linkage with the refugee units and with UNHCR. And in this sense, there have been important progressions in creating regularization for indigenous individuals. We have already mentioned, for example, the translation of the refugee application form, which has been translated and linguistic accompaniment to indigenous individuals. But we also believe that it is important on how access to information to these procedures is adequated in formats that are much more accessible, meaning verbal formats. It was mentioned that close to 96% of the indigenous population is of low scholarity. So the way in these with forms are adequated, and from Prilaca, in that sense, along with UNHCR, we're about to launch a campaign in Mosquito regarding the rights of individuals that tell them how to apply for refugee, what are their rights as indigenous or migrants here in Costa Rica, where to go, where processes take place, and we believe that this is going to have a great impact because it's not only going to provide them access to individuals who are able to read, but those who don't. And the linkage with different stakeholders and different university departments has been important. From Prilaca, we have established linkage with the geography department of the University of Costa Rica, through which we have facilitated courses and trainings in geolocalization statistics for professionals who require these skills. It has also been very important to carry out articulated work with Nicaraguan civil society organizations. Prilaca is part of the Nicaraguan Network Piece, which is an articulated space of civil society organizations in Nicaragua, through which we provide institutional strengthening, but also provide articulations for defending human rights and international incidency. This and other spaces for indigenous communities, such as the Observatory for Indigenous and African Descending, uh, in approximately 106 communities in the national territory. Other opportunities that perhaps have not been used at their very best have been the linkage with Costa Rican institutions, the linkage and coordination with institutions such as IMAS, INAMU, INA, and the Ministry of Public Education, in order to determine which programs could perhaps be facilitated to indigenous and African descending communities according to their necessities. Also, greater linkage with the private sector to incorporate the indigenous and African descending communities into the labor market, and also understanding how the National Agency for Employment works, which was already mentioned. We believe it's important to mention the power that media outlets have in the construction of collective um, perceptions. The Nicaraguan media outlets are constantly onboarding the problematic of Costa Rican immigration and its varieties, but we wonder how can we have incidency uh, in the Costa Rican media outlets. And we previously spoke about the discriminatory discourses towards the migrational population. We have existed for a while, and how to use the power of media outlets in Costa Rica to construct or actually deconstruct these myths and prejudices around the Nicaraguan and different migrative communities. It's also important to speak about the double and triple discrimination that indigenous populations suffer because of their language, the color of their skin, in which there is not only discrimination for the sake of being Nicaraguan, but also because of the language that you speak. We have had situations of discrimination in liberal spaces where they are forbidden speak in their own native languages, and also educational spaces where children are limited in using their own native languages in fear of being discriminated. One of the most important opportunities is that Prilaca is one of the very few indigenous organizations that is legally constituted in Costa Rica. As you can see, we have several Nicaraguan organizations present, but there's only one indigenous organization. In that sense, to operate in Costa Rica is an opportunity, but also a challenge. It is an opportunity because it allows to channel funding to provide support to indigenous families from their own particularities, with individuals who speak their language, understand their culture, and understand their social cultural context that they are in. But it's also a challenge because it implicates understanding how to legally operate in Costa Rica, how are the taxing processes here and the different articulations such as the revenue ministry and the social security administration, which are other challenges that other Nicaraguan organizations are facing. Also, regarding the challenges, I feel that it is important to mention the immigration authorities in Costa Rica still don't contemplate the record of ethnic self identification in migrant populations. And this is important because we usually say that whatever is not told does not exist. In the case of the immigration of indigenous populations, this is something that dates back to the 80s, and we normally said, and we know that there are many, but we don't know exactly how many in terms of numbers. So, in that sense, we believe it is important to continue causing incidents in order to achieve ethnic self identification in the records and statistical records in Costa Rica. I know an important advance is that INEC in the 2022 poll included the mosquito category, but we know that the population is much more diverse than that. Um, and those would be one of the main challenges that I could mention. Thank you. Thank you, Alejandra. And in order to wrap up with this segment, we're going to be hearing Mr. Cesar Ramirez from the Chamber of Commerce for up to 3 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Um, Today, I am representing the Chamber of Commerce, but at the same time, I want to speak in my own experience. I am a Nicaraguan, I am a migrant, and thanks to the work of all organizations, but most importantly, the work of the Chamber of Commerce, and thanks to the agreement established with UNHCR and their commitment, and also thanks to their abilities of connecting, mobilizing the private sector, is that this company for which I work today 6 years ago had the openness of hiring me only with the refugee application without even having a single document yet. And I believe that this is an opportunity that has allowed me to integrate myself to the Costa Rican society by accessing dignifying work that allows me to exercise my profession, something that not everyone in the diversity of migrants is not always possible for individuals. We have heard of many limitations, but one that I want to highlight today is the political and social environment in Costa Rica and the work that all organizations carry out in order to successfully um, make possible the liberal insertion and also accessing education and healthcare system for many migrants. Now, as a member of the chamber and as a member of my organization, as a member of the Committee for Human Talent in the Chamber of Commerce, we have challenges that we have to continue working upon, particularly in creating awareness on diversity in order to construct organizations that are more innovative, that are more creative, and that can successfully tend to the current and future challenges of this economy that we are all part of, and also establishing connections between the private sector and connecting them with existing talents in the migrant community, and also closing the gaps in order to connect them and help them contribute more and more, because much of that talent is wasted. Um, and lastly, I would like to highlight that without losing the identity as professionals, it is also a personal challenge to become aligned to the organizational and company culture and general culture of the country. Thank you very much, Cesar, and thank you to all the organizations for your ample participation. Now, with this, we're closing the open dialogue. We're going to have a small section with the main table, and then we're going to move out to the external deck to take a photo, and then I invite you all to join us at the cafeteria for the lunch that we have prepared. First of all, we're gonna hear Mr. Andres Ellis, representative for the UNHCR. Excuse me. We're going to be hearing Ruben Mivik Dilava.
Things to say. One is thank you so very, very much to all of you for attending this dialogue. And it's interesting because I've been looking around the room and I realized that practically every single actor or stakeholder involved or interested in forced displacement issues is represented here. So you have the faith-based organizations, you have the NGOs, you have the refugees themselves, you have the academics, you have the Chamber of Commerce, you have the private sector, you have sister UN agencies, and certainly last but not least, representatives of the Costa Rican government here as well. So thank you very much. I think this clearly demonstrates the interest that you have in this issue and your commitment, in fact, to addressing the problems raised by displacement. The second thing I want to say is this is the second of the 3 dialogues that I've attended, the first being the inaugural one in Geneva. And the one thing that has really struck me from attending these 2 dialogues is listening to the refugees themselves and understanding they, like the rest of the society, the refugee community is not a monolith. It's made up of, it's a mosaic. It's made up of different categories, different populations with different interests. And all of them, or almost all of them, are represented here. You do have the LGBTQI plus community, you have the women, you have the indigenous people, you have human rights activists, you have the youth, and many others who are seated around this table and representing the interests of that particular population. But the one thing you all have in common is your remarkable resilience, your adaptability, your ability to survive some of the worst experiences that the rest of us have fortunately never had to experience. But the fact that despite all of that, you are here contributing to the society that you're living in. We just heard some very compelling examples of that. The Costa Rican Red Cross representative mentioned the critical role played by refugees during the epidemic of chikungunya and dengue fever, the critical role that they played in containing the epidemic. You've heard other critical examples as well of refugees being integrated into various branches of the society here through their own hard work and through their commitment. So to all of you, I want to say thank you. This series of dialogues, I hope, will help to resolve some of the concerns and the issues that you have raised here. It will not be tomorrow. It will probably not be even the day after, but we hope it will certainly happen in our lifetime. So thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner. Now we're going to hear some closing remarks from Ravine Abraham Skorka. I cannot add specific data or advices of some sort regarding the work that all of you carry out because you are the experts, you know the problems, you understand them, and you have probably the tools to find corresponding solutions. The only thing I would like to bring here is just echoing history. As you know, the sacred books can be analyzed from different angles. Some can perceive it as sacred words spoken by God or from rabbis that have been intervened by God. But it's just as we can have believers, we can have atheists, agnostics present, but a common denominator for the reading of these sacred books is that they have the sapience of life. They say things from an ethical perspective, from a humanistic perspective, from what we understand that ethic and humanistic, which is very deep. It touches our hearts, opens our eyes, and I'm going to mention 2 examples. As you know, in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, there is a verse in the 4th book, that in chapter 10, book of Deuteronomy, which says, "You will love the foreigner, you will love the migrant or the refugee," because 3,000 years ago, they were probably a mix of refugees, migrants, those who were being mobilized from one territory to another. And the verse finalizes saying, because you were foreigners in the land of Egypt, the representative of the Red Cross said something tremendously interesting. Many of those in power in Latin America, and I would say the vast majority, are second, third generations of people who migrated from Europe as refugees or just as mere migrants, given enormous situations that they may have faced when a decision such as these is taken. Each one of the leaders should keep that in mind, such as this verse teaches us. And now I'd like to mention a thought regarding migrants and refugees, which in Hebrew is said as the word ger. In the 12th century, a great rabbi and philosopher who was born in Andalusia, Spain, and he is known in Europe as Maimonides, in Hubra, Moshe ben Maimon ibn Musa in, in Arab. And he said the following with regards a mother or a father, what the Bible prescribes the verse states, you will love the foreigner. Now, regarding a father and a mother, what the Bible prescribes are two things in particular: to honor them and to have a special type of respect towards them. Regarding the prophets, they have to be heard, but the migrant has to be loved. And there is a word here that this great rabbi attempted to teach us. If you draw a very thin line throughout everything that was explained here, all the prejudices and all of the rejections that have taken place since this analysis of the immigration processes started, forced by one or other reason, going well beyond the term of refugee. What we have is a situation of prejudice as analyzed, of rejection as it was analyzed by some of you, and the only response is that for the one who suffers should be a response coming from love, just like the one we all our fathers and mothers be, and even more important because we have to overcome distances, because there is a reason why these biblical verse go well beyond that understanding it as the word of God or not, but it is something that holds a lot of intelligence and wisdom and great humanism, and it is the verb you will love, the key to create real commitment with those in the world and in our dear Latin America. We towards those that have had to abandon their homelands. Thank you, and we wish you the greatest success. Thank you, Mr. Ravine. We would like to also thank the representatives of the Costa Rican government, the NGOs, organizations, and the other organizations led by refugees who have been present today at the University for Peace, and also thank the University for Peace for welcoming us and hosting us in their home. Now we're going to hear Mr. Francisco Rojas, Rector of the University for Peace. Thank you very much. I would just like to thank the presence of each of you. Thank you for all of your interventions. The education in terms of values and the creation of a culture of peace and nonviolence is the path towards sustainable peace. The education to respect towards human rights, the empowerment of women, tolerance, establishing dialogues, and promotion of universal dialogues is the fundament for this. To build peace, it is required for us to work for peace, and this meeting is an example of working towards set peace, and it's an essential task of the multilateralism of which UNHCR, University for Peace, and the whole system of United Nations is a participant of, and that is currently under attack. This goes well beyond specific regions, or states, and it is effectively a task of we, the people. The goals of the great public assets are based on cooperative action, multilateral association in order to make progress, and the development of dialogue is a tool that holds great efficiency. Most likely, there isn't any greater. So, if you want peace, we have to work towards said peace. Thank you to each and every one of you, and in particular to our distinguished Deputy High Commissioner for Protection from UNHCR. Thank you, Mr. Andres Celis, Mr. Ravine, and the staff from the university, starting with the rector, with the vice rector, and everyone who has worked for the success of this meeting. A round of applause to each and every one of us. Thank you very much, Mr. Rector. So we would really appreciate if you can join us for a group photograph on the deck outside, and after